All right, Nightmare Success listeners, we're back. And I want to give a shout out, a couple of different shout outs today. We are doing, this is our first episode for season 3. So I want to thank everybody. It's been a great ride, and these stories that I've been able to sit down with and you guys have been able to hear. It's just been a lot of fun. So really looking forward to season 3, and I'm excited about my guests. I also want to give a shout out to Christina Hodgson, who actually connected me with my guest Adam Clausen. Adam, I mean, his story. How do you deal with 213 years sentenced to prison? I mean, how do you ever wrap your mind around something like that? And my wife and I were watching last night. We were watching Roe, his wife, and him on their podcast talking about their life and and it's just such an incredible thing. How do I talk to a guy that was in for 213 years? Well, I don't. He got out early. He was in for 20 years, which is an awfully long time. When I look at my sentence, it was 5 years. But he had support. He had an incredible rock star wife who believed in him. They supported each other. They leaned on each other. And in the end, they got an incredible person to help them. And a lot of you might know the name Shon Hopwood. They did a feature on him on 60 Minutes. His story was he was a basketball player. I think a Division II basketball player. He got into robbing a bank and got 10 years, but he became quite a legend in the prison, writing briefs that went to the Supreme Court. He got out. He became an attorney. He went and he's now at Georgetown as a law professor, but he also had his hands deep into the First Step Act. Shon Hopwood and Roe, Adam's wife, got together, and with the First Step Act, they started working on getting Adam out, and they did through the First Step Act with a compassionate release. This is just an incredible story. I can't wait to unpack all this because Adam is just a cool guy. I think you're going to love his story. Before we get into that, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. And no problems, Eddie, my Eddie Logan, my friend that's a dentist. I'm just saying nobody really likes to go to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing, full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. I also want to give a shout out to, I've got a new podcast studio here at Homestead Financial. If you're looking, Greg Aftiev is one of the partners here. It's a great setup. He's been a big supporter of mine, and I've got fancy stuff now. I've got a fancy camera, so this is cool. So shout out to Homestead Financial. If you need a home mortgage, check them out. They'll get you through the pain, and then you get the pleasure. Adam Clausen, welcome in.
Thanks for having me.
I have been excited to interview you. I've watched. Oh gosh, Justin Paperny had you on. You've been on a lot of different things. If you want to go read about Adam Clausen, there's a lot to read about. But his story is fascinating, and I think, and we were just talking about Adam. You've been out 3 years,
just over 3 years. Yep.
And plus, you got out right when the craziness happened with the pandemic. How weird is that? You spend 20 years in prison, and then you get released, and the world is shut down.
It was the perfect time. Like, honestly, if I'm being honest about it, COVID was a big part of me being granted my release. The way that I got out kind of helped encourage things flowed with my case differently. because of COVID. I didn't have to go through the process of, getting transferred back down to Philadelphia, going through holding. Like, that's a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
Everybody remembers that process. To have to go back through that, I was grateful that Shon, my attorney, was able to get that waived. He went down there, advocated on my behalf, and I got to be honest, there's no one else on this planet that I would have left my life entirely in his hands. He told me, he said, "Man, I got you," and that was all I needed to hear. There's nobody who knows this part of the law better. We had so many conversations over the years, and on a personal level, like I knew that he was invested in not just my case, but me, my family, my wife. So yeah, he did an amazing job.
It's
And
unreal.
oh
I mean, if you're
God,
going to have a guy that knows his stuff, Shon Hopwood. I mean, if you look it up in the dictionary, knows his stuff, Shon Hopwood.
that's listen, the best, right? The best.
And I think the other interesting thing is, we'll get into all this, but your story and his story kind of commingled a little bit. And I think he probably saw some of himself, and what you did in prison really, I think, built a strong foundation for him to be able to make the case in this resentencing hearing, because we'll get into this, but you became somebody, and we know, when we both have been in prison, there's a certain way that primitive prison world is, and if you can be that person that helps people, that gets them to another step, you're looked at differently in prison, and you helped a lot of people in prison. I want to go back, Adam, because I know your life isn't like it is now. When you were growing up, take us back to young Adam. What was going on in your life growing up as a kid?
I'm gonna be honest. As a kid, I had a lot of opportunities, very similar to Shon. Grew up playing ball. That opened the door to scholarships. I went to private schools, college prep, and was part of a program where I had access. Like, the expectation was to go to college. And that was just all lined up. It's like, this is where you're going. And for me, it was dreaming about what could be next, playing, pro ball or semi-pro ball. And a lot of people that I grew up playing with, that was ultimately where they ended up. For me, I wasn't so fortunate. I wanted to party, I wanted to hang out, I wanted to do all of those other things as well. And the more that I did that, the further it pulled me, away from that future. And I got caught up definitely with the wrong guys at a young age.
How did that
And
happen though for you, Adam? Because I mean, we both are guys that played basketball and sports, and a lot of times when you get in that world, you can definitely take the fork in the road and go. There's a lot of, in high school, being an athlete, it's a great thing. You can either go and just dedicate yourself to being that 100% of the time, or you can, like you said, dabble in the rewards of being that athlete. Where was your break? Like, what happened? How did you break off?
I think I have always been very strong-willed, and not having a male figure in my life, like somebody in the house to really keep me on track. I can say that now, as an adult who has a child, I didn't have that guidance, and my coaches, people at school, teachers, administrators, they definitely weren't positioned to help guide me. And eventually I just became too much for them, and they washed their hands and said, "Listen, we can't have you here anymore. You're causing too much trouble." Ultimately, it was the FBI showing up at that college prep when I was sophomore going into my junior year of high school. It's part of a stolen car ring. So those kids that I went to school with all came from, relative means. They were upper middle class or just upper class. I didn't come from that, but I wanted to be a part of it, and there was no means for me to get there. So as a kid, I use the available means to me. And there were, adults who were all too eager to turn me loose on that wrong path. And I followed that as far as I could until it landed me in prison at the age of 18, prior to graduating high school. And I wound up in a state prison with a 12-year sentence for a string of robberies and burglaries. And, that changed the entire course of my life, because
Sure.
those scholarships, everything that I had lined up, that was all gone. Nobody wanted to touch me at that point. And when I walked out of prison at 21 years old, I had a felony conviction.
Mhm.
I had a GED. I had no college, couple college courses. I had no real skills. And at that point, who wants to give you a chance?
Mhm.
So I didn't realize how many things were going to be stacked against me. And I certainly wasn't prepared. I didn't have a plan for that. So when I walked out the door and it all hit me, if I'm being honest about it, I gave it maybe 2-3 weeks of, trying to do the right thing and stay with the program and parole and going to work. And finally, I just said, man, F it. I'm off and running. Went right back to those same people who were all too eager
To take you
to
back in.
take me back in, feed that negativity. And, you hear people in prison talk about having a good run.
Yeah.
For 2.5 years, I sold a lot of drugs, did a lot of crime. But if I'm being honest about that, I was so alone,
Mhm.
lonely, hollow, by all outward appearances. People would look at my life, especially, in my peer group, early 20s. They're like, man, you're living the life. You're in the bars, you're in the clubs, you got VIP access.
Yeah.
And man, it was, I was so desperate to find something or someone to connect with. And I never found that. It caught up to me before I could. Committed another string of robberies downtown Philadelphia, all illegal establishments. And, in my young, immature thinking, it's like, well, these
You're
people,
doing
they're
it
all
illegal, then it's all illegal and it's okay.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all in the game, like they're part of this. And I didn't, that's not a realistic view. I deeply regret all those things that I did, all the people that I harmed directly, indirectly, because when the feds caught up with me the second time, this
Yeah.
time, they were eager to remind me, yeah, you got away from us the first time, not this time. You're facing, hundreds of years. I'm like, yeah, I've heard that story before.
Mhm.
But when I looked in the law books, I said, wow, they can actually give me a couple hundred years if they convict me on all these counts. I had to make a decision, because what they wanted was for me to testify against some other people.
Well, and I think that's part of the interesting part of your story, because you went to trial, and I've heard you say that you were being naive because that was just part of the next step that you thought you should do, and you could somehow wiggle away from it. And as we all know, in the federal system, it's hard to wiggle away. I have Jason Rauschenbach, that was a guest on the show. He said it's like your beer softball team going against the LA Dodgers. It usually is not going to end up well. But I'm interested though, Adam, like you said early on in your life, before this all happened, your home life, siblings and your mom and dad, did they split, or what was the situation there?
Parents split when I was 5.
Okay.
It was just my mom and myself. At the time when this happened, we were living in the Midwest. That's where all of our family was.
Yeah.
My mom, I give her a ton of credit. Like this is the 80s,
Yeah.
strong working woman. She went back to school. She got her degree, and there were opportunities for her, but they required, moving, relocating. And she got an offer out on the East Coast, out in New Jersey. And she said, hey, like, we're going to go start a new life, just me and you. I'm a 9-year-old kid, 10 years old. We moved from the Midwest to the East Coast, culture shock, obviously.
Sure.
And at the same time, we didn't have any supports around us. It literally was just me and her. And she spent a lot of time grinding, in the office, putting in the work, to advance to create a better life for us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as a kid, I was out running the streets by myself, zero supervision. And my peer group, the other kids at that age, they're like, who's this farm boy? I didn't grow up on a farm, right? Never lived on a
Oh, but if
farm.
you say you came from the Midwest, I'm in St. Louis and people assume I live on a farm.
So you know exactly what I'm talking about. So the presumption is you're a farm boy, you don't know nothing about, East Coast. And so I got into a lot of fights. Police were called plenty of times. So my interaction with the law started very early
Really?
on.
Well, I mean, at 18 years
And
old, going, for a 12-year sentence, that's really entering.
yeah,
And I've by listening to some of your stuff, Adam, the night that you got hit, it's kind of interesting because, well, it's very interesting, not kind of interesting. You're in this bad place, and I think it's got, massage parlor and all kinds of different stuff. But I think you actually dropped your gun behind like the wall. They would have never have found your gun the way that you dropped it down in there. So the only way that you got that was that, it became who knows what, and then the cooperating. But it's I think at the time that you got hit that night, I think you were a little bit high. You guys talked about that you were gonna just take your guns blazing and leave, and you didn't realize you didn't have enough bullets. And then you decided, it's just like on the movie, what's that movie called? The
usual suspects.
Yeah, Usual Suspects. Yeah, where you just kind of blend in. You took your shirt off as if you're getting hit for like being in the massage spot. You get down there, you get in the car, you're saying to the guys, gosh, I hope my wife doesn't find out. I'm going to be in a lot of trouble, thinking that you've already blended in, but you notice that the guy behind is in the other car that you're with, and you start thinking, what?
I turned around, I looked at him, and there was just something. I could see it in his face. And I watched the detective come back up to the door. I'm in there with two other guys, right? Two
Yeah.
other guys that got nothing to do with nothing. They're like, oh God, this is like we're in a cop car. This is the worst thing that ever could have happened. Meanwhile, I'm like, this is the best situation I could be in. We're gonna slide out of here.
Yep.
And this detective comes back up to the window and he looks, he's like, you, come on out, come out of here. And I knew right then, I said, oh man, I said, we got a problem here. And it was all downhill from there, you know, and it was because of that first individual, whatever he was telling those detectives, there's statements that I have records of, and he basically said, I'll talk to the DEA, the ATF, the FBI, whomever else wants to hear my story.
Right.
But I've got information about drug trafficking, links to organized crime, and this other group that they were after at the time. And that's what got everybody interested. That's how I end up in federal court, honestly.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's the beer league versus the pros. And for those who've never been up against the federal government, when I say unlimited resources, I mean that. They reached out to family members to harass them, sent people to their homes back in the Midwest.
Yeah.
These are people that have nothing to do with my criminal activity, right?
Yep.
They did it to cut off all my supports,
Yeah.
to
Scares
break my
people to death.
spirit. Yep.
Scares
And
people to death. And there's so many things that people don't know about, the federal system, even to the point where I was just having a discussion the other day, somebody gets a federal grand jury indictment. And I think there's probably 99% that think that the federal grand jury hears both sides, that they actually hear from the defendant and the prosecutor, and they don't. They only present their side. So when there's that statement, you can indict a ham sandwich, of course, because you're only hearing one side, but there's so many other things. And the thing that most freaks you out is when you see the United States of America versus your name. That's like the most intimidating experience of seeing something on a piece of paper. How long did this process last for you, Adam, with the night that you got taken in to getting to the point where you decided you're going to court, you went to court? How long was all that in your life?
Wow, good question. It felt like an eternity, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And especially, when you're sitting in those holding tanks, and they definitely dragged us uh through the state system, for about a week, until the feds had already decided to pick up our case, but they were just trying to make it as physically unbearable as possible. So they dragged us through these holding cells and these horrible places. And eventually, when they decide to, bring us in, arraign us, indict us, now they bring us into the federal system, which was much better at that time. People talk about club fed. I had heard those things. I, walk into my first federal facility and I was like, wow, this isn't bad. But again, this is in 2000. Things all changed very much over those 2 decades. But at the same time, here come the resources of the federal government. All of those places were literally wired for sound. Everything's recorded. We had countless individuals coming at us trying to get information, people who were, looking to gain information that they could leverage for their own, to improve their own situation. So to feel like you are constantly under attack and that people are literally out to get you, like it's not conspiracy, that's your reality. And it's very tough. We went through that for a year prior to trial, and kind of when it was all validated, you feel these things, what's happening, but it seems like it's a nightmare, right? Like this can't possibly be happening.
Yeah.
But the day that we went into court for a pretrial suppression hearing, as in federal court, they do not have to release a witness list. That's what's different between state and federal. But they do have to give you discovery. So we have boxes and boxes of statements, and it's just madness. But we go into court, and technically all the identifications that were done throughout our case should have been thrown out, because the way that they did it, they took a Polaroid, my picture on it, with my name and some number. It wasn't my state number or federal number, but it had a number on it. And they showed it to witnesses and said, isn't this Adam Clausen? Isn't this the guy who was here at this place in this time?
Yeah.
They did it in, informal hearings, and they did it in the grand jury. That's the only time that we were ever identified. Now, for any of the legal beagles out there, like, you talk about basic protections against misidentification, this is at the top of the list. Like, this is something you absolutely cannot do under any circumstance.
Right.
They did it every time. It was the only way that they did it. So we go into court, and the judge is holding a hearing on this. And he's like, basically, why shouldn't I just throw all of this out? And the prosecutor's like, well, you can't, like, this is their case.
Yeah.
Like, if you do this, like, what do we have? And the judge says, okay, so how many witnesses are we talking about? And he says, oh, too many to do this right now. It would take up too much time. He says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to take a 10-minute recess. You have 10 minutes to come up with your entire witness list. Bring it in here. You're going to let me know who you plan to call. And anyone that's not on that list is not going to be able to testify. And then I'll decide if it's too many for us to deal with, right now or on a case-by-case basis. They're panicked. They're like, oh my God, we need to produce a witness list. They come back in 10 minutes later, and I'm writing the names down.
Yeah.
And a lot of these names I don't recognize.
Yeah.
Come to find out, they were guys from the housing unit that we were on. They're just guys that we've, passed in holding cells. Mm-hmm. That night when we get back, because they held off on the ruling, but we get back, they keep us in the holding cell basically overnight, because they had to move all of these people off of that housing unit. And it was like 15 people. And that validated, was like, okay, none of this was a dream. It's exactly what we thought. It validates these suspicions. Didn't make me feel any better. If
No,
anything,
no.
now like I don't want to talk or look at anybody.
Right.
So it was the most stressful period of my entire life. I I hope that, you know, gives you just a glimpse of what that might have looked like, but I'd never ever want to live through that again.
No. So you're at the, as you're standing there to be sentenced, are you, I mean, because the way I understand is that what you were sentenced on could be 8 years. If there was a firearm used, that it could possibly be 20. Because you didn't cooperate and give information about things you didn't know about because they weren't involved in what you were doing, they decided that they would just stack these charges. Did you think when the judge said, because it was really 8 years plus 205, which is 213, did you think that's, did you think that was even a possibility?
You know, it's funny, the sentencing always comes up because most people going into sentencing don't know what they're going to get.
Yeah,
As soon as I was convicted, I knew that I was getting a life sentence
you knew it.
because that 205 years, those were mandatory minimums. That was the bare minimum.
So the judge
The,
didn't have a choice.
he didn't have any choice. The only variability um, that he had was with that 8 years. And honestly, it was 96 to 121 months. That was my guideline range, meaning because of my prior offenses, because of the current, it took me from 0 years up to 8 to 10 years, which is what I should have received for the robberies. And like Shon, he got the 12 years. Maybe you throw on some enhancements for the use of a firearm. They take me up a little bit higher. I get 12, 15, whatever.
And you got 213.
213 because of that
Okay.
other
Adam,
statute.
you're going to have to walk me through this. I mean, what does a guy or a girl do in your mind knowing that you're going to be walking out of there and you've been given 213 years? What, walk me through your, what's going through your mind?
Mm. Um,
I can't
in the
imagine.
moment, in the moment, I was really, it was basically just numb.
Right. Blur.
It's kind of a blur. The sentence, I knew what I was getting, walked out of there. But what I do recall quite vividly was being in the holding cell with my two co-defendants. There was three of us who ultimately went to trial, and it's silent. And that's unusual when you're back in those holding pens.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of noise and chaos, and it was absolutely silent. Everybody knew that we had just come back in. They knew that the two of us had gotten life sentences. I got 213, one got 85, yet my other co-defendant, and this is often overlooked, was acquitted on 6 of the 9 counts. They gave him, for the 3 counts, they gave him 10 years.
Wow.
And he's feeling like guilty that he got such a break that he didn't, because he could have easily ended up with a life sentence as well. And so we're sitting there, it's silent, and I started laughing. And these two look at me like, oh God, he's lost it.
He lost his mind.
He's lost it. It's day one and he lost it already.
Whatever a nervous breakdown is, I guess that's it.
But the reality is, I thought back to when 18 years old, state prison, being out on the yard, every afternoon the slider would open up from the hallway going into, there's a lifers unit, and this one guy would come out, this white guy named Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
And they had found him driving around with 2 dead bodies in the trunk, his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend. Like brutal crime, like overwhelming evidence. This guy's, he's done.
Yeah.
Kevin worked in the law library, but would come out to the yard every afternoon to play ball with us. And he was absolutely miserable. When that door would open and people would see him come out, they'd go, oh, you know, just suck the life out of the whole yard. They're like, oh, not this guy again.
Yeah.
And I remember, because I knew him from when we were kids. And I said, man, you don't know what he's going through. Like, I can't imagine what it feels like to be in his shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, give this guy, cut him some slack, man. You know, give him a little bit of grace. But he was miserable every day. Never saw him like happy, not once. So in that moment, sitting in that cell, in that silence, I started laughing because in my mind, I was thinking about Kev coming out the door, and I said, that's not going to be me. That will never be me. So it was a conscious decision from day one on how I was going to approach this. I said, listen, my life is not over. And although I got this crazy sentence, the thing is, like, it's absurd. They gave me 213 years. Like, nobody died.
No.
Like, some point, common sense is going to prevail. Like, how does this thing stand? And honestly, it was the absurdity of it that helped me to hold on to hope. Like, nah, somewhere, some point, you know, somebody's gonna help me out here.
And you know, that if you lose hope, or if you don't have a mindset like that, you won't be able to find anything because you're not looking for it. And
well put.
I think, you know, what you did in the laundry list, list of things that you accomplished in prison, when you walked into that place, what was, because you're walking into a primitive environment, you were, I think, in a max, you eventually moved down to a medium. That's not a great place to be. Because I remember I was at the halfway house, the Dismas house, and I remember some of those guys that were coming back from the maximum that we were 150 guys in that halfway house. Some of those guys that came from, because they put all custody levels in there, they look different. You can see it in their eyes. They look different. And then the other ones that I was with, I even had a roommate, totally nice guy. And I guess, you walking into that world, I mean, you'd been in prison before, but how did you walk in there?
Interesting. I like that you use the term primitive. And it's primitive. It brings out those base instincts. It's survival. For me, I had a couple things going for me. That time that I had done in the state, that kind of established who I was prior to that. Even though I'm a young, good-looking white guy coming into this, very violent, openly hostile environment, I knew that I had to come in pretty aggressive. I'm not aligned and never have been associated with any group or organization. So it's me standing on my own, and I made a determination, like, I'm going to do this on my own, and I'm going to make it very clear from the beginning. So I went in with that mindset, but I hit the yard at USP Allenwood, in 2000, beginning of 2001. And like, there's, gangsters that they've made movies about from all over the country, and world famous spies, and like, this is the place. And back then there was only a handful. There was only a couple of penitentiaries. So, and guys made the rounds from one to the other. I walk onto the yard, my early 20s, 213 years, and I felt like I had something to prove. And when I walked in, they were waiting for me. Walk in with my bedroll, slider opens, I get into the unit. Dude's like, hey, Adam, come here. Knows my name, knows my time, knows everything. All of that has preceded me, right? Which in my case is a good thing. But they're still going to test me, see where I'm at. I'm literally smoking a joint, drinking, homemade wine before I even get to my cell. I don't even know where my bunk is yet, but I'm in the cell with these guys, and they're like, here's a knife, here's a smoke, here's a drink. We got knives here, here, and here. Like, this is the deal. And this is what it is. And I'm like, all right. but I'm still like figuring out where I can set my boundaries and how do I establish myself. And I did that. Again, I'm very fortunate. I'm a very good athlete,
Mm-hmm.
and
Which is
that's one
good
of
in prison, by the way. That's a
yes, it
nice,
is.
and it's an escape, in the mind to be able to. It makes you feel like you're on the outside.
It does to a degree. There's certain elements of it. So early on, sports also helped me establish. They talk about prison rules. It's a different game on the inside, and I happen to play pretty aggressively anyways. So it was a good way for me to establish myself. And I think because of that, just the intensity that I brought to everything that I did, the time kind of the persona. Uh, People knew me from my background, and for at least those first 5 years, like that's how they saw me. There was an identity that went along with that.
So
It was
Adam,
all
you didn't feel pressure to, because you've got the blacks, the Hispanics, the whites, and then you've got those sectioned into to gang groups in that world. Because when you go down custody levels, there's less and less of that. Did you feel pressure? Because a lot of it is for protection too. You have you join into those, you have to do certain things to basically get hazed into a position, but you walked on the outside of that.
I did, and my experience is pretty unique in that regard.
Yeah.
That's not afforded most people. Again, I think it was a combination of factors that allowed me to do that, and uh, believe me, they tried to recruit me plenty of times. Like,
I'm sure they did.
it's like teams trying to draft somebody. Like, we want you with us,
Yeah.
and because of all those attributes that I had, and obviously, people have always seen strong leadership. Although I had shied away, I had led people in the wrong direction. Uh,
You start using it in a different direction.
I did. I saw an opportunity to say, I I don't want to buy into this. I want to be able to do my own thing, carve out space, and be able to do something positive. Let people follow me in that direction.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's a huge part of your story. One is that you became more or less a trainer physically,
Hmm.
or, um, and then, and I want to get into this also, is because you became a certified life coach in prison. And there was a lady, was it Susan Folk? Um,
Correct.
yeah, she came in as an administrator who had this idea. And one of the things I thought that was really fascinating was that she went into the chow hall and she looked around to see who were the leaders. And she identified you just by being in the chow hall. And she went in and she started recruiting people that she believed could be these people that she wanted to work with. There's a couple of things that are really unique about that. One is that people don't talk a lot to administrators because they feel like that they can be called out as a snitch or whatever the case is. You have to have a lot of respect to be able to even transcend that, to talk to administrators, and people assume that you're okay. Adam, walk us through how this all happened for you, because I also want this to be a conversation about how Roe came into your life. And I'm not positive if that was at the same time or if that came after.
Actually, Ro had come into my life before I left the penitentiary. Um, and it was interesting. She and I connected over that shared passion for fitness.
Mm-hmm.
And that had become my foundation, but it also had become my identity. Like,
Sure.
I became the fitness guru instead of all those other negative things from my past. So that was the beginning of that transition. When I got to McKean, like, I never expected to get to a medium. And to be perfectly honest, I actually fought the transfer, as crazy as that
Well, no, it's
sounds.
not crazy, because in prison, it's really strange because, I was at a prison that didn't have air conditioning, and a lot of the guys say, "Man, I'd really like to go to a prison that's got air conditioning." And I got to the point where, like, I don't know. I don't want to go. I've set up. I've got my
Mhm.
stuff. You know, if I got transferred to Marion or something, then I know, but then you got to go through the whole transfer thing and the whole thing. It's weird how you get set up in prison. And I don't know if it's really anything that you can really, you and I could talk about that, Adam. But it's a strange, weird phenomenon in prison, how you get set up and you got your stuff, you got your locker, you've got whatever you feel like you have a routine, because you don't have control in prison, but you have these things in your routine that you think you control. You are in control, and at any given moment, you know, they can lock the place down, they can make you hit, you know, the chest to the ground, they can do all that stuff. But so you weren't thinking, I'm going to move to a medium. You fought it.
I did. They put me in without my knowledge. There's about 30 of us, 30 lifers. You know, it was a bureau-wide reclassification. We need to shuffle some people around. We want to
That's
bring some higher security down to medium. They submitted me, and it wasn't until the final stages that I actually learned about it. So when I got it, I was
Was
like,
this before? Okay, so you had met Roe in the penitentiary, the
"Yep."
max.
About a year before.
All right, let's talk about it, because it's and there were two different stories, and I understand it now because it's so hard to get to visit a prisoner if you don't have any relationship. And so
Ooh.
there's a storyline where you guys were high school uh, people, and then there's the real story that an inmate that was a friend of yours had he's either a girlfriend or a wife, and he wanted her not to travel really by herself. So that's how I think you guys got initiated into talking to each other. But I don't know if you were actually talking by core links then, or if she visited and then you guys created the relationship.
So here's the real story, right? As he said, for those who don't know, if you want to visit someone in the Bureau of Prisons, you sign a form, legal, waiver saying, yes, I knew this person prior to their incarceration under threat of perjury, right? Like this is what the Bureau does. Again, they're straight gangsters. So living under this concern of being found out, the story was, and it's plausible, right? She's from North Jersey. I'm from South Jersey. I'm playing ball. I'm up in East Orange. I go up there for the top 100 and for different events. We could have met during high school. Like nobody can dispute that,
Right.
but that's not what happened.
Right.
So my new identity as a fitness guru, big bodybuilder comes in, like runner up Mr. New Jersey. They send him right to me. And this guy's just like a ball of energy. And I'm like, ooh, slow down, slow down. And like from day one, he is on me and he's like, hey, man, my girl's going to be coming up here. She's got a cousin, her friend. Like, why don't you two hook up? And I'm like, I'm good. He's like, what do you mean you're good? What are you, a monk? Like,
Yeah.
you don't want to see a woman?
Yeah.
I'm like, slow it down. I'm in a good place. I've cut off my ex, those other relationships. Like, believe it or not, I'm content right now. But he was pretty insistent. He said, listen, just connect, write her. So we had just gotten the emails. I had started putting stuff out there, and I guess she had been able to read some of it, was like, I don't know if I really want to, connect with a lifer, go to this prison. But I'm sure part of it was, this is kind of interesting. Like, so anyways, she and I start writing back and forth via core links. And I realized very quickly, like for the first time in my life, I was building a relationship based off of pure communication, no distractions by physical, by us going out partying. Like I got to know her
Yeah. You guys went
more
deep.
up. We went deep, like quick.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I found myself saying, this is exactly the type of woman, if I were to get out today, like who that I would want to be with. Like we're of the same mindset. We have the same shared passion for fitness. Like I could see us, having a life that together. And I've never seen that before. So it very quickly escalated to ultimately her coming up there. And that first visit, like when she walked through the door, I looked, I'm like,
Well,
oh,
because well, I want to, Adam, you skipped over the fact that you didn't know. You kind of thought if she was
I
in her,
didn't.
she might be kind of a bigger girl, and you were
Okay, yeah, yeah.
okay with that. It's kind of
Let me
funny because
describe this. Let me
you were
describe
kind of
this.
okay with it.
Well, here's the thing, right? The guy, this I told you, runner up, Mr. New Jersey. He's a big bodybuilder.
Sure.
So when he is describing her to me,
Yeah.
he's talking about her lat spread, and I'm like, whoa. And I had to check myself because I said, listen, I'm not going to be shallow. I'm not
Right.
going to be that guy anymore.
Yeah.
I said I wasn't going to worry about the aesthetic. The conversation is so good, but I got to be honest, right? Like there were some
Oh, she's
concerns. I'm
fine.
like, that's not my taste. That's not my personal taste.
Yeah.
Not to knock anybody else,
Oh.
but they're coming up on Saturday morning. Haven't seen a picture. Don't know what she looks like aside from his description. And Friday, right after 4 o'clock, out, bang, bang, bang on my door. And he pulls the door open. I'm like, whoa, slow down, time out, slow down. He's like, man, I got the pictures. And he slaps them down on the desk. And I remember catching my breath, like, and I'm like, oh God, like you're invested in this, man. Like, relax. I was like, it doesn't matter.
Uh-huh.
He opened that first one and I looked, and it's a picture of her. Hold on, I'll show you.
Okay.
Um, right here.
Okay.
That's
Oh
the
my God.
picture.
All right.
Right? You can see it.
Got it. Everybody can
Okay.
see it now.
She's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
She's fitness. She's Miss Fitness New Jersey, you know, but I'm thinking Xena Warrior Princess.
Right.
That she is not.
Oh, she's not.
So, and then she, he opens up the rest of the pictures and I look, it's just her, normal. And I'm like, oh my God, this woman's beautiful. She's beautiful and she's everything else that I've always wanted. So when we go out there for that first visit, she walks around the corner and I see her and I'm like, oh God, what are we gonna do? Like, I'm done.
And
I was like,
you've been in at this time like 8 or 9 years.
almost 10, that was probably about 9 years in at that
Okay.
point.
A
Yep.
long time.
Yeah. Yeah. 9 years in. And you know, me moving to the medium security went from her making the trip up to see me at Allenwood, was about 3.5 hours each way, to double that, 6.5 hours each way. That changes everything, right? Like that's not, let me shoot out here and come back in the same day. No, it turns it into a weekend. Her life revolved around visits, coming to see me for years. Like that's a lot.
Well, and I think I so identified with your all's conversations, especially Ro talking about, she had different outfits, because she, somebody would walk in with the exact outfit of hers and then say to her, your outfit's too tight, or you can't have an open toe shoe, or you can't have this or that. And, I had a wife that came every weekend, 4.5 hours one way. She'd pick up one of the daughters on the way because they were at University of Missouri, so it was on the way. And it was always a tense on both sides, her side of getting in and, my side of making sure that somebody didn't mess up our points, these crazy ass visiting points that they had, that it was made to not make you have a visit, because they say they want to encourage visits and they make it the hardest they can make for somebody. And we had 2 visits. So I remember one, it was my middle daughter Carly's birthday, and so all the girls and Julie had come up, and just because this Swanson guy knew that I liked visits and knew that I got a lot of visits and it's what I kind of lived for, he just turned them away at the door. So he's out of points. So when I heard your story on that, I think, that's that feeling of, I just don't have any control, and it goes on both sides. Ro living for those visits and you living for those visits, when they find out that you like those visits, being the staff, they sometimes use that against you, and that can be harder for them to get in and see you.
Oh, we definitely had to contend with a lot of opposition from, staff, not just out front, but because of what I was doing on the inside,
Yeah.
and her visibility on the outside with the YouTube channel, with Strong Prison Wives and Families, the community that she built,
Which has
because of the
over, I think you've got 23, she's got 23,000 subscribers on YouTube and over 100,000 women that were a part of that. She was
yep,
quite the advocate.
amazing.
And one of the things I think my wife would have desperately needed that and didn't know about it at the time, because I went in 2000, January 2014, and I wish she would have been able to connect to that, because she was always looking for, because there's not very many of that in the world that Roe and Julie were living in. It was going and visiting all the time and trying to figure out how to get here and there and the money and everything else that's involved, and just getting the visit to happen is all those things that go into it. But so you meet with Roe, and you guys already know you've connected because you've been talking to each other, which is all backwards. And so now you have a personal face to face. Tell me.
And yeah, that was it. I mean, we had to have those conversations very early on where, we acknowledged how we were both feeling.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, neither one of us intended this. This was definitely not the plan. But what are we going to do about it? And I was always very clear with her, saying, because she came in at the point where my final appeal, my sentence became final. Supreme Court denied 2005. So by the time she came in, the only options available to us were, one, to get Congress to change the law, or two, to find a president who was willing to sign a commutation of sentence. Now, we're still in the tough on crime era. Nobody's talking about criminal justice reform. And for someone who's a repeat violent offender, had to be very clear, like, the reality is there's not too many people that are going to line up and get behind us.
Right.
But, if we invest the time, do the legwork, like, build the support that we need, like, I believe that we can get there, but I don't know how long it's going to take. It might take another 10, 20 years. And at the time, she was very idealistic. She was like, yeah, we got this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, are you sure? She's like, I got this.
And
And,
those who
she,
haven't watched Roe on YouTube, it sounds exactly like something Roe would say.
yes. And she was determined to get me out and for us to have this life that we now have. Although admittedly, some of the highs and lows, the lows were very low, harder than we would have imagined they would
Talk
become.
about some of the lows, because I mean, there's tough times in prison, obviously. And you have good days in prison, but tough days in prison are really dark. And I know
Yeah.
there were times that you went through, and I, 2016, was it 2016? There was a time when you had Roe was doing a candlelight vigil at the White House. And
Mhm.
I think, Adam, you were literally on the desk of either the vice president or the president. It would have been Biden and Obama. And
Mhm.
and she was out there wanting to be seen that this is, and the word is that they just ran out of time.
I'm gonna say they ran out of courage
Yeah.
before they ran out of time, because it was a conscious decision. And I get it. I mean, we had always talked about it. My case is because of a repeat violent offender. I'm a political liability. We
Yeah.
we knew that going in. It was
Okay.
the same reason that many of the advocacy organizations didn't really want to be connected to us. They're like, oh, it's a terrible situation you're in. We'd love to help, but we got to keep our distance.
Right.
Like, there are better cases to put out front. So I dealt with that for many years, and that was
Well,
obviously, it was difficult for
you
her.
dealt with it, Adam, but what you were doing on the inside is, I think, what really actually became the momentum. What you did on the outside, what you did on the inside, and And I want you to kind of explain what you did with this life coach certification thing and what you did with Susan, because, uh, and I know it's going to lead into some of the things that you're doing today with social purpose corrections. But um, what did you think when that was presented to you? The idea with Susan and being a leader and life coaching and that. What was your thoughts?
Um, like you said, here's an administrator coming to me, wants me to be a part of a program, which first and foremost, I don't do programs. I have my courses up in rec. That's my space. That's where I'm comfortable. If you want to be a part of it, you can join. But there are certain things that I don't go out and do. Like I'm comfortable up here. And she was adamant about me participating, being a part of this. So first thing is a group. The second thing is administrators don't lead groups. Like
No.
that just doesn't happen. So this is like strange, foreign on a couple different levels. But the individuals that she reached out to um, were all guys with a great deal of respect, credibility on the compound. And one of them in particular came to me, my friend Talib, who was the imam. He was the head of the Muslim community. He was also from DC. He was a lifer. Been in, had a great deal of respect. That's the only way that he could operate in those roles. And he and I had become pretty close. He came up and met me in my space, to connect with me there. And we had started doing some things together. And he's like, man, come on down to education. I had never been there. So I got introduced to a different space. And it definitely, I was attracted to the opportunity to get back into, more of a group setting, learning. And I said, okay, let me give this a shot. The one exchange that stands out most in my mind, and you'll appreciate this, Susan comes in, AW folk at the time, comes in and says, Shakir, Clausen, come here. I need to speak to you. This is like almost like an order, right? Come here. Pulls us out. We're down in education. And everything's windows, right? For security purposes, so you can see. And in the middle is a staff lounge or break room with this long table. That's where they have their meetings. She walks over, opens the door, clears the room, pulls the staff out, tells us, come in, sets us down, sit down. And I'm like, I'm not real. I tell her up front, I said, listen, I'm not comfortable with this. She was like, would you please sit down? So it's not an order, right? She's asking me. And I said, listen, let me just be clear. I said, if Talib was not here with me, I said, I don't know if I would take this seat right now by myself, you and I in a room, closed door. I said, look around, because all eyes are on us.
Sure.
And she was like, well, that's what we need to fix. And she said, I really want you to be a part of this program. I need both of you, and I need you all the way bought in. I know that others, if you guys are involved, others will be involved, and, kind of mapped out her vision for what coaching could bring to that community. And by doing what she did, she sent a very clear message to staff, to everyone. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm behind it. I'm going to invest in these guys. And for me, that really set the stage, although I was extremely uncomfortable. We had some candid conversations right there, back and forth. And we walked out of there and I said, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to see where this goes. And little by little, she just kept pulling me further and further outside of my comfort zone. Until, I was fully bought in. I understood that she was personally invested, that there was a level of trust, of mutual respect. And it really, man, it changed my whole attitude, my belief in what was possible, because I was having a new experience. And, I was pretty excited about that and eager to utilize my influence to help bring that to others, to get them to buy in. And I started to see that as my responsibility. Maybe somewhere deep down, because this was not a motivating factor at the time, I realized that I was part of something that could be like much larger than all of us, incredibly impactful. But I didn't yet see it because in my mind, I didn't see a link to how does this become credible in helping get me out of prison. I didn't see a connection there. Like for me, I knew that I had to do something, many things, to build this record of credibility, of significance that someone on the outside would look at and go, wow, this is impressive. I'm going to put my name on it. I didn't see this prison program, life coaching, when it first started, as that opportunity. So it was a personal investment first and foremost. It was later, over time, when the Institute for Life Coach Training came in, started talking about certifying us, about giving us credibility, about giving us a platform beyond the prison. And you know, all of the scholarships that came in, like then all of a sudden now there's substance. Now there's these additional layers of credibility, which spread to national attention. And then it's at this point, it's like, oh God, how did I end up here?
Yeah.
Like I'm doing things that have never been done in prison before. I didn't know when we started that it would lead to this, but let's see how far we can take this.
Well, and the biggest piece of this is it was taking punishment and flipping it to rehabilitation and life coaching people through to their layers of accomplishments with the intent of preparing them to get out and having a real reentry instead of one that turns into a U-turn for a lot of people. And I have to think, you know, in that time that you're doing that, and you're seeing the change affected, and you're seeing the recognition, you're gaining confidence with just your abilities of being able to do something inside the walls of prison that is affecting change. With Roe and you changing things on both sides, how did Shon Hopwood and Roe get connected? Because that became a huge part of how then you became really close friends, and he bought into everything about your case. Explain how that happened?
Well, that was actually before I left Allenwood. There was a New York Times article, and Roe had seen it online. She forwarded it to me via email, and she said, hey, she said, this guy's got a pretty interesting story. I think you might want to reach out to him. And I was very active in getting her to forward emails like, this is someone I want to connect with. Here's someone else. She was the one who brought it to my attention and said, you should try and connect with him. And I did. I wrote him a pretty long email. He responded. And from there, we just, you know, started talking. Again, he took a personal interest, and it was just over the years staying connected. So this is before he had any big success, which is really what allowed us to build that relationship. Because, you know, like nowadays, you try and send him an email, the odds of that email getting to him, just the sheer volume, number of people, you know, who reach out. So I was very fortunate on the timing. We were able to build that relationship. And Roe was, you know, intentional about staying closely connected to him. Any opportunity, like when there were different events, whether it was something that he was doing or something she was doing on the outside, or that we were doing on the inside to promote something nationally, we always kept him very much connected to that. And it became a personal investment on his end.
Yeah. So when the First Step Act happened and he had his hands all in the middle of that, Jared Kushner and others, did you know that this was going to be, or did he bring it to you? How did your steps happen from that First Step Act going into effect, and then seeing that there was a resentencing possibility with compassionate release, Shon being a guy that would be the right guy? I mean, so it's a perfect storm in a good way.
Um, Shon was there at the White House when all of this was taking place. And our first hope was that, because we waited all these years, and remember, change the statute or get the president to sign off on a commutation. Well, here it is. Congress is changing the statute. And in the last hour, they removed retroactivity, meaning for everyone who had previously been sentenced, too bad, you still have your time, but we're saying this law is unjust and it can never be used in the same way going forward. That seems incredibly unfair. And for people who don't understand the law, that is often the case because, and it's purely for political reasons, it provides cover for all of those who vote for a change in law.
Sure.
Because there's no way to say, well, this guy got out because of you and did this and you're responsible.
Right.
So
Well, it's as simple as like something, take the cannabis law, they take it federal, but they say that the people who were charged under cannabis have to stay in prison, but the new charges, they won't take them out down.
makes absolutely no sense, purely political. So unfortunately, in the last hour, retroactivity was removed. But fortunately, on the other side, that compassionate release, there was just a line that was removed that took it from having to go through the director of the Bureau of Prisons before it could be submitted. And the director, again, is a political appointment. Directors historically have never signed off. Even people on their deathbed, like, there's no reason they're not going to do it. They're not going to subject themselves to that liability. But when you remove the director from the equation, which is what they did, they just pulled one line out of that statute. It opened the door. The problem is nobody understood the significance of what had been done. So Shon went to the media, he went to all the legal publications, and then he went to the courts, to all the circuit forums, and started advocating, saying, here's what we did. Here's what we did. And here's the vehicle that's now available to us to get people back into court. And especially for those who statutes were changed but not made retroactive, this is their opportunity to have their case reheard. So again, due to my background, my case was not the one to put out front. So Shon very strategically found those cases that had a lower threshold that he could get into the court, start building a record, start getting some wins. And next thing you know, like, the courts overwhelmingly are saying, yes, we can do this. Keep in mind, this takes a couple of years to develop this record. This is not overnight. So from 2018 to 2020, we're building this. I'm on the sidelines going, come on, man, like, what are we doing here? And like, when's my turn? I've been pretty patient. I got over 20 years in. And what added to that was Shon wrote up a motion, used my case as the template, circulated it, sent it out to all the federal defender's offices, and published it different places and said, use it freely. Most attorneys won't do that.
Right.
But he was adamant about getting this out there and letting people use it. Thousands of motions were filed. They still had my name in it. As the template, people didn't even remove and put their own names in. It still had my name. Awesome. And Shon brings that up, like, kind of jokingly. He's like, and guys got relief off of that. So again, I'm like, well, I didn't get relief. Like, when are we going to do mine?
Right.
And finally, Shon came back and said, okay, now's the time. Now's the time. We're putting it in. I felt more than confident about the record that I had, about the supports that I had built, and the plan that I had for post-release. I had all the pieces in place. I thought it would be very difficult for someone to rule against me, because ultimately it comes down to, have you served enough time and have you done enough to make amends?
Right.
And I felt like I was always weighing that scale. I hit the 20-year mark. I had all these accomplishments, things that had never been done. I said, I feel good. I feel good. I've got a future. Man, run with it. Vividly recall, sit down at the Core Links, have an email from Shon. It just says, call me. We need to talk. That's it. But you know, you can read a lot just in those few words because of our dialogue. And I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
I already know what it is. I know what it is. I have to sleep on this because I can't get back on the phone until the following morning. And the whole night I'm thinking about, man, there is no way. I've got 20 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office. There's nothing that they could possibly want from me. Mm-hmm. Next morning I get up, I call him. He says, you know, I have to ask you this. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't even need to ask me. He goes, we submitted the motion. He said, Bob Zausmer, U.S. Attorney, said the only way that they will even consider this is if you agree to cooperate. He goes, and I have to bring it to you. I said, Shon, you already know the answer, man. Now, my resolve is strong for all the same reasons. Listen, I regret everything I did. I regret all the people who have been harmed, but I also would never put anyone else in my place, right? Like, that's just victimizing more people. So I was solid on that. But at the same time, I was so angry that they would even bring that, because I have to say no.
You didn't.
Listen, there's nothing that I have to offer them at this point. So the only reason that they bring this is for me to tap out and say, yes, the federal government won. We're not giving up any losses here. And two, to detract from my credibility, what I have worked so hard to establish. They know that my future includes fulfilling my purpose to help others successfully transition out, working with incarcerated, formerly incarcerated. And if I take something like that, I'm giving up all my credibility.
Right.
So I was angry. I was pissed that I had to call Ro afterwards and tell her. No hesitation. She has no hesitation. She's like, that's what I love about you. I love your integrity. She was like, we're good. We're going to figure it out. My parents, on the other hand, not so much, but anyways, we got through that. And it wasn't long after where the judge said, listen, I have legal grounds. I'm throwing your sentence out. When that happened, U.S. Attorney changed. Bob Zausmer came back and said, okay, we don't agree with the legal means, but we do believe that he's done enough time. He's accomplished all these things. So we are not going to fight it. Whatever sentence the judge wants to impose, we're going to let him know that we're good with, and we will not appeal. Huge. Again, for all those legal beagles out there, when that never happens, first of all, because they appeal everything, no matter what. But saying that they would not appeal gave the judge the autonomy that he needed. Like, there's no recourse. They're not going to come back and try and fight my decision. I can do whatever I want. My hands are free. That's a rare thing for judges these days. So it was a big deal. And ultimately, because I think everybody knows how this worked out, one of the things that we don't often talk about is Shon was adamant about making sure that they did not appeal, because he was concerned about how things would play out in the future. About a year after I'm out, I get my release. I'm out here. We have a baby boy just been born. And I get a phone call from Shon, who says, man, he says, brace yourself. He said, today would have been the day. The Third Circuit overturned case law. He said, if they would have appealed, you would be going back to prison for the rest of your 213 years today. He said, that's why it was so important.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that part of the story until you just said that.
Oof.
Wow.
Yeah, that
deep breath
took my breath away.
Wow. Well, it was meant to be, Adam, because, it's hard to say how big a deal it is for you to have the mindset that you had with 213 years, that you just felt like, if I just keep chipping away, it kind of reminds me of the movie with Shawshank. He just chips away every night at the wall for 20 years, and he lets that wall out every day in the yard as his victory, his daily victory. He's getting there. He's getting there. And after 20 years, he goes through that tunnel and he sets himself free. That's kind of what you're doing. You were chipping away at the wall every night and didn't give up at it, because you give up at it. That's the thing about Shawshank. You say you get busy living, get busy dying, and you can walk down a prison hallway and see who chose which way. And you didn't. You got busy living in prison. And then you had Roe, which is another find that is just fascinating, that all happened, and she became an advocate for you. And then you had Shon, who you guys created a personal relationship. So he wanted to fight for you. He needed to fight for you because he related so much to your story. And now you are out doing incredible things. And let's talk about what you're doing. Just let everybody know what you're doing.
Well, as I said, you've had Brian on already. Brian's amazing. Connected with him shortly after we got out to Las Vegas, shared this crazy vision that he had while he was still a ward. He said, there's a better way to do prisons. He had a nonprofit model for operating prisons, taking all of the revenue that comes in, puts it back into wellness for both staff and for residents, to create a better culture, a better environment. That's something that resonated with me, because for that short period in time, what Susan Folk, while she was an administrator, she carved out that space, created that environment for me, and that helped transform my life. So that's part of my purpose. When Brian shared that vision, I said, man, this is something I need to be a part of. I've served as basically an advisor for a couple.
I love the title you have. You are the Director of Innovation and Social Impact, which I mean, that's a power statement there. Director of Innovation and Social Impact.
Big time.
And I believe that you earned that title because it talks about you crisis management, crisis resolution, you did all that inside the walls, and then helping people on the outside through reentry, and then through this social purpose corrections to actually reinvent, taking the good stuff and pushing it back into rehabilitation inside the walls. And what a big, big impact it could all have. And, it's people who have experienced it that need to sit around the table, and both you and Brian have experienced it on different sides. So but I want to go back real quick, because a lot of people can't probably get their arms around what it would have been like for you to walk out after 20 years into a life that you and Roe had planned on. What did all that feel like to you? Because you're still experiencing it.
Yeah. Wow. Because of how things went wrong the first time I got out at 21, I was able to spend a lot of time thinking about what I would do differently. And I literally got to work with thousands of men directly, indirectly over the years, helping them plan. And in helping them plan, I renewed my own plans, countless times. So we had a very clear vision for what our future was going to look like. It's not to say that, there are challenges
Always
that come up, right? And those are very real. I didn't have identification, no driver's license, no social security card, no birth certificate, because they shredded those when they found out I was getting released, right? A little bit of animosity there. So I had to get those documents, go through, the same things that everybody else does getting out of prison, but it was my mindset, and it was knowing I literally had her by my side holding my hand. And for me, that was huge. That's what I had always been looking for, that level of connection and support. And us having that strong connection beforehand. When I walked out, it was so smooth. It was so natural. For both of us who have been living independently for so long, you would think that would be a difficult transition to figure it out. It wasn't. It was, and it was
You say
great.
one of the things that you really liked was being able to work out together because you had that so much.
Oh, I've got some great videos of us doing partner workouts. Her on my back, I'm doing squats, walking down the block, and then wheelbarrows back and forth. People are like, "You two are crazy." I'm like, "But these are some of the things like that we dreamed about doing, and now we get to do them together."
Yeah,
So,
it's very cool. And you've got a little boy. He's 2 years old.
2 years old,
Yeah.
Christian. He is, man. He's the boss now.
Yeah.
Like our agendas have gone out the door. Everything with him comes first. And it's
I know.
amazing, like you see, I'm working from home,
Yeah.
she's working from home,
Yeah.
and our life is built around making sure that we spend as much time together as possible and that we're here for him.
And Adam, I think one of the things just reminded me, you talking about that being together and experiencing moments together. It's been 7 years since I've been out, but it's coming up on 7 years, but I still capture moments in time, like when the family's together, or like if we're on a family vacation, I'm just sitting around and I secretly am taking in, I'm just so glad I'm here. I'm just so glad I'm here to experience it because I wasn't at one point, and you just take it in. And it's only for a few seconds, but it's something I didn't have before because I always loved the family. I always loved our family trips, but it's that feeling of being there, that I'm here. I'm so thankful that I'm here. It's just a weird feeling.
Oh, believe me, gratitude is the foundation for
Huge.
everything in our lives. And I'm going to say that I have a far greater appreciation than most people will ever know because I was never supposed to be here,
Right.
right? And
And you
there
could have
it
been, if that wouldn't have happened, Adam, you could have been back in by the appeal.
sure,
God,
sure. There's so many things that had to line up for me to be here. There are things that I had to avoid, things that I had to accomplish, and things from the universe by divine design, I say, that had to come into alignment for me to be right here. But with that comes a great weight of responsibility
yeah,
to make sure that I'm doing my part, to
making
make
it.
sure that I'm following through on my commitments and making sure that opportunities are available for others.
Well, let me ask you this because I always ask everybody this on the show because you just said a lot of it. But after everything that you've been through this whole experience that you've experienced and where you are now, what do you think's your greatest takeaway through it all?
Oh, my greatest takeaway is to not lose that sense of appreciation. I live every day. At the end of the day, my wife and I, before we go to sleep, ask ourselves, and now that our son is just starting to talk, we ask him too. His response is pretty much the same every day. What are you most grateful for?
Love it.
So it's an opportunity for us to be present, to reflect on what we've done that day. Uh, and it's something that we do together. So it's the focus on what is most important.
I love that. And that's a great way to end it. If some people want to get a hold of you, people want to get a hold of you, Adam. How do they get a hold of you? Where do they go?
I'm pretty easy to find online. Uh, Adam Bentley Clausen, Roe and Adam on YouTube, Roe and Adam Clausen. You see up on the board, Gritability. That's our podcast, Power of Perseverance. Overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. That's us talking about overcoming challenges and connecting with other individuals who have amazing stories that inspire us. We'd love to feel like that's part of our purpose as well, right?
Oh,
Not only
absolutely.
using our story, but connecting with others who are inspiring. So we would love to have you on our show.
All right, Adam. I have mouth. We'll go. Um, let's see what else here. And Ro has a book too, right?
She does.
I'm sure we can look it up. Ro Clausen on Amazon. I'll put it in the show notes. I'll find the title.
Yeah, please do.
And if anybody's looking for my book, it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Nightmare Success. Um, Love you guys. I got a whole bunch of new reviews on Apple, which I just love that, because for whatever reason, it puts the show on steroids when people do that. Thanks for taking the time to do that. If anybody wants to go where I'm at, brentcassidy.com. It's with a TY, not a DY, with Shon and David. I wish I would have been there, but I'm the TY guy. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from prison, stay strong. I'll do the same. Adam Clausen, man, what a story. Glad you're back.
I am so glad to be here, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Nightmare Success, in and out. Thanks, everybody.